Hello, folks. Welcome to another episode of Who Says. This is where we get real about the US, China, and everything and everywhere in between. It is two superpowers, but it's one global story. And this week, all eyes are on Belém, Brazil, where COP30 is taking place. It's been 33 years since the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was first signed in Rio de Janeiro. So, COP is back, back on Brazilian soil, back to its Brazilian roots. But the stakes couldn't be higher this year, because the question we want to ask today is who's gaining, who's losing in terms of climate action, and how is the climate agenda reshaping global power dynamics. Joining me as always on the show is Professor Emeritus Woo Wing Thye. Prof, let's look at what's happening in Brazil. So COP30, the 30th conference of parties under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Back in Brazil now, how significant is this COP, and how should we understand it in the broader context of global climate diplomacy?
Well, it comes certainly when we know that the global temperature, the average global temperature for the year, went over 1.5 degrees above the level of the pre-industrial age last year. So last year, we went above 1.5, which was the target that the Paris Climate Treaty was trying to aim at. And as you know, every country prepares something called the nationally determined contribution, which it gives to the United Nations, saying what they are doing to reduce the emissions of CO2. If you take all those national targets in the nationally determined contributions, we will be getting at least 2.5 degrees above the average of the industrial age. In other words, we not only have hit 1.5, we are going to hit 2.5. So that certainly is not a good situation.
Right.
And the big thing is, even if people are willing to do it, they have to be able to get the means to do it. The means to do it is that we need to make conversions in our energy system, for example, so that we stop generating electricity with coal and gas, but either with green, renewable sources like water, hydro, and of course, solar power. And that requires money. And one of the big goals of President Lula is to increase the financing for climate action to 1.3 trillion per year, which is much closer to what that is needed than the usual less than 1/3 amount that has been offered. So that is a very big step. The other, perhaps symbolic action that occurred was all the official cars that are being used in Belém to take delegates around are BYD brand, which means that it's almost like saying the primary driver of green climate action is China. And this, of course, comes at a very bad time, where Donald Trump has just told the United Nations that climate change is a hoax, although the only thing that was a hoax was that claim itself. So, yes, we are in a situation where all of science says that we are going to exceed the 1.5. And here is someone who's making a valiant effort to raise money to do it, in the face of an irresponsible action by the richest country in the world.
Right. Can I ask you about that? Because last year, if you recall, COP29 convened, I think it was just days after Donald Trump was re-elected as president of the United States, and that was anything anyone could talk about when they talked about COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, because of course the last time that he was in office, the US withdrew from the Paris Agreement. You mentioned that Donald Trump had called climate change a hoax in the UN at the UN Assembly. What has this past year been like for climate action with Trump back in the White House? How do you assess the past year having played out?
Well, he not only has called it a hoax, he has backed it up with actions. Like, for example, he has stopped the funding of the development of alternative energy sources. And like, for example, there was a plan to make green EVs in America. He's taken away the tax credit for those companies that were going to do it. And the other thing he has done is he has doubled down on the sale of American gas to the rest of the world. If you look at the trade treaty that Malaysia signed when he was here, we agreed to buy more US gas. We signed to import more US gas. And if you look at many of the trade treaties, that's what he has made it a condition of. Of course, it is possible that people may buy more gas from America and less gas from other places. So that does not mean by itself that the countries are backtracking. The total amount of gas they end up using could be a lot less by offsetting their purchases from the traditional suppliers. And he has also looking actively into granting permits to drill in different parts of the United States. That is the other action.
Right.
And of course, USAID had programs to help the poorer countries to decarbonize their economies, and all those plans have been removed from USAID. In fact, USAID itself has ceased to exist.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. While we talk about climate COP, it is important to know that the United Nations have 3 conferences on the environment. The climate is the one that's most well known. The second one is the biodiversity COP, because biodiversity can be lost not only because of climate change, but because we do things like over-harvesting the fish, cutting down too much forest for wood, or simply polluting. So the second COP is biodiversity.
Right.
So then the third one is desertification.
Okay.
And so when these 3 are interrelated, of course.
Okay. Professor, would the COP on biodiversity be the one that's more relevant to a country like Malaysia? Because our contribution to carbon emission is quite low considered per capita, but we're home to a huge reserve of biodiversity thanks to our wonderful rainforests. Do you think that we're paying attention to the wrong one? I mean, just sitting here in Malaysia, with all the focus on COP30 and the COP of the climate change convening, do you think we've lost focus as to which should be our priority?
No, not at all. In fact, we have kept both firmly in sight. We have kept our attention on decarbonizing the Malaysian economy, as well as preserving biodiversity, especially in East Malaysia. Because in West Malaysia, thanks to long time clearing of forests for cultivation, we have basically deforested Western Malaysia already. So over there, the question is rehabilitating the land. So Malaysia has paid attention to both, largely because they are both interrelated. Like, for example, climate change. If the temperature continues to go up, it will heat up the water of the oceans, and that will kill the coral reefs that in which we have a lot of. And the coral reefs constitute the breeding ground for fish. So we certainly cannot just talk about biodiversity and neglect the fact that biodiversity is hurt by the higher temperature. And we cannot talk about biodiversity protection without realizing that it actually helps to fight global warming. It's just like deforestation. If we deforest less, then there will be more trees sucking in the CO2. And furthermore, when we clear peatland for agriculture, then we are releasing CO2. We not only have less trees, but we're actually releasing CO2. So the two are mutually reinforcing. And Malaysia is clearly thinking with both sides of its brains when it goes on to will pay attention to both.
Right.
The only thing we have not talked about is desertification, because that's not a problem here.
Okay. Well, coming back to COP30 in Belém, let's talk a little bit about that, because I know in COP29 Baku, that was really kind of positioned as the finance COP, so talking about money and the loss and what was it called? The loss and damage fund. Yes, so talking about how more developed countries can help stump for maybe less developed countries in terms of climate compensation or climate resilience. When you think about this COP and the power dynamics at play, I love that you brought up the BYD cars, because I think that's really a nice reflection of how power dynamics comes to play with COP, right? There's a lot of climate diplomacy at stake here, a lot of lobbying happening at all these COP conferences. So when you think about COP, this COP in particular, is it still about saving the environment? Is it still about getting below the 1.5 degrees? Or is it about power and who has the bigger leverage and lobbying muscle? The kind of positioning between nations?
Well, the only president who has really expressed opposition to the COP is Donald Trump. As you can see, the rest of the world has not changed its commitment to fighting climate change. I think this is the unfortunate fact that those of us who can act should continue to act. And we hope that the United States would get off its populist rage and join the rest of the world. So we have to keep the world safe until the US returns to greater, when it gets over its anger and frustration over many of its domestic problems.
Right. Do you? There were tensions between the global north and global south, I think, in COP29, talking about who should pay for climate damage and who should cut emissions faster. Do you still see this as a dispute about fairness? I'm wondering, because sometimes I do see this reoccurring pattern of unequal power when it comes to global climate governance. Is that something that you have noticed as well?
Well, the good news is that one of the loudest voice against increasing the budget is missing this time, which is the United States.
Okay. The United States is not involved in COP?
This year,
Yeah.
it certainly is there,
Okay.
but it clearly cannot be as loud when it tells that when the rest of the world knows that it speaks from a basis which contradicts science. So the moral force which the US was able to marshal in the past is not there. And it is important that the financing that Lula talks about is not just money to decarbonize, in other words, to undertake climate action. He is also going to launch a, a rainforest, a global rainforest fund to defend the lungs of the world, which basically are the Amazon jungle, the Congo Basin jungle, and the rainforests of Southeast Asia. So, as a sign of that, Malaysia has been thinking with both sides of the brains. I should tell you that at Sunway University, we have got two big projects. One of them involves 10 country teams in each of the ASEAN countries drawing up plans on how to decarbonize. And not only how to decarbonize, but how we should link up our electricity generation systems so that the cheapest producer can produce for the more expensive producers, like Laos selling hydropower to Singapore. So that is one thing that we in Malaysia have done, and our team is in Belém reporting on this ASEAN initiative and of what we have done to promote the ASEAN power grid, which is a necessary component. The second thing that we have done is we are the leaders of a 300-person research team drawn from Indonesia, Brunei, and Malaysia to form the Science Panel for Borneo. The Science Panel for Borneo has finished a report of over 3,000 pages on how to better protect, come up with practical solutions of how to better protect the fauna, flora, and the indigenous communities on the island of Borneo. So it is also a case of 3 countries working together. And this is not at the official level. These are mostly university professors from the 3 countries who have gotten together to draw up this detailed plan. So there is at the official pavilion of COP30, there's going to be a special session of the 3 forests. The science panel for the Amazon, the science panel for Congo Basin, and the science panel on Borneo. And Malaysia is proudly leading both the science panel for Borneo as well as the decarbonization study of the ASEAN. So we are fulfilling our global responsibility, largely because having money alone is not enough. We have to know what to do. And so we have come up with very practical ways of doing it. And the good news is we don't pretend that we know everything. We have got our neighbors to participate in these studies too. So the COP is a high point for me personally because it's a coming to fruition of 2 big projects we've been doing for the last 5 years on how to decarbonize the Southeast Asian economies and do it in a cost-effective manner. And the second is how do we protect biodiversity?
Yeah,
So
I'm so
I
happy.
surely feel good.
Yes, and as you should, because it really is an amazing project. When I first heard about the science panel for Borneo, I didn't realize the scale of the treasure we have in this part of the world. I didn't realize in our backyard, in Borneo, in East Malaysia, the treasure we have and what responsibility we have as, I think, stewards, as environmental stewards, for the lungs of the, we're producing oxygen for the rest of the world, essentially. And that's such an important responsibility. I love that this is going to be the culmination of this project will be at COP30 in Brazil, where we're also talking about the other lungs of the the other lungs of the world. Definitely wonderful that this is happening there. Just even though we have all these big feelings and pride about our biodiversity, and I know a lot of people feel so strongly and want to see more urgency in climate action. I do remember hearing some, I think discontent would be the right word, particularly in Baku in COP29, where there was chatter that the COP process is maybe broken or not functioning the way it's supposed to, and that maybe it's time to move beyond the COP process of, requiring the agreement of every single country before we see progress, because getting that consensus can take a long time, and some countries have stronger punching power than other countries. Do you agree with that, Prof? Do you see that there is that the COP process may not be working the way it's supposed to? Is there any merit in that argument?
Well, the reason why we have been disappointed in the COPs is because we have high expectations of ourselves. So when we do not see, when we can see ways of producing better outcomes, we are naturally disappointed that the most efficient way has not come. But I see it as it is a delay sometimes. But the important thing is those who can should go ahead with implementing these actions, because they provide inspiration for the people who are lagging behind. Let me say that climate change and biodiversity protection are not just for the good of the whole world. It turns out it is very important for us, because if we don't do it, some of the major world actors will punish us for not doing it. For example, look at palm oil production. We have had so much flag from the Europeans and other parts of the world about the loss of biodiversity because of the clearing of land. So now we have turned our attention to increasing the yield per acre of palm oil trees that are grown. In other words, we are making scientific progress in improving the genes of the oil palm so that they produce higher quality oil. And then furthermore, we also know that we want to use more organic fertilizer, because the old fertilizer that we used to use a lot of is leaching into the water table and going into the stream and causing loss of species. The third thing that we have known now is how to design oil palm plantations better, so that we actually have animal corridor, so that they can migrate from one part of the forest to another. You cannot keep them, because then if we don't have these corridors, there are occasional rampages, you could say. And this clash between man and animals could be avoided. And all of these have come about partly because of external pressure. And because of this accelerated a big transition in the palm oil industry. So the idea, clearly, it would be stupid to say why don't we just greatly reduce the palm oil industry in Malaysia? Then the question is, how do the people earn their income? Should they go meat hunting instead? That would certainly, make things worse. So I think we have been able to be creative to come up with solutions to the many objections to palm oil production in Malaysia. And let's face it, of all the different kinds of vegetable oil, palm oil produces the most vegetable oil per acre. Peanut just is peanuts. There's no way that they can make up for what palm oil could produce. So we have, and you could also see that because of our greater demand for green energy, Sarawak has now think about building this undersea cable to connect their supply to the peninsula or to Singapore. So, this is a very the good news is we have reacted to the crisis and we are moving things in the right way. Now you got to move the needle faster. And to move the needle faster, we need to be able to galvanize the funding to do it. Right. There's no use having the intention and not getting the funding to do it. And getting the funding to do it is not just everybody dig deeper into their pockets. We got to use funding schemes that let people put in more money and lower the risk to them when they put down money to it. For example, there is this mechanism called blended finance. Blended finance works by basically the government or the international agency covering the risk of the investment. And because the risk of investment is taken out, private investors are willing to lend at a much lower rate than they otherwise would. Very good example is like, let us say, if the green project has a 3% possibility of failure. That means that the market interest rate would be what the interest rate would be to a safe project plus 3 percentage points. So the safe rate is 4, you plus 3, that'll be 7. But whereas if the government puts the money down to cover the 3% of losses, they can crowd in 97% of private funds for the project.
That's really interesting. I've been hearing a lot more about blended finance. Do you think it's being adapted and adopted in terms of financing or funding some of these green projects or green transition projects, or is it still nascent, still a buzzword? Because I keep hearing so much about it. There's such potential, but I wonder whether whether it's really being adopted in financial markets.
To adopt it, the government must increase the amount of money they have to spend covering the risk. And what that would mean in practice is that international multilateral banks like the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and so forth, have to have more capital. Because if they have more capital, then they can go out and borrow from the private market at a much lower rate and re-lending it to these projects that we talk about. Because they are the ones who have to cover the risk, and the capital in which they have would allow them to greatly scale up the amount of private funds that would go to these projects. So the first thing we need to do is to scale up the capital base of the multilateral banks. And the reason why it has not been done is because these multilateral banks are controlled by a board. And the voting power of the members of the board depends on the share of capital that the country has put in. And the biggest share has been the United States. And the United States has been unwilling to put in any more capital. And so it has prevented the expansion of that capital. Other countries like China and Japan had volunteered to expand the base, but you cannot expand the base without the agreement of the board. And the United States wasn't going to let its vote be diluted, and so has always stood in the way of preventing the Japanese from expanding the Asian Development Bank. The Asian Development Bank could be as big as the World Bank, but when the Japanese wanted to do it, the Americans outvoted them, and that was not done. And they continue to outvote everybody else at the existing share. So the Chinese got so frustrated, they started the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank so that they can go ahead and make these loans, development loans, without getting permission from the United States.
Oh dear. Don't you just love it that everything we talk about actually comes back full circle to the US and China and power affairs? I mean, it really does boil down. All roads lead to Rome eventually.
Well, but the good news is if we are able to get them to work together, if we are able, during their periods when they are both on the same page, and there have been periods like that, which is what the world was before 2016, where people were working together. So it's too early to write off the possibility of cooperation and of the stakeholders not becoming more responsible over time.
Okay. Prof, can I ask you one last question before we wrap this episode? I know this is a huge COP and one that's personally meaningful to you as well. So maybe you can share with us what you hope to see coming out of COP30. Are you hoping for some, what is blue sky scenario, and what is the realistic expectations? What are the realistic expectations? Can we achieve blue sky scenario?
Yes, I think we can. One thing we could do is that the world as a whole agrees to a timetable on the transformation of electricity generation from coal and gas as the fuel to water, sun, and wind. So I certainly think that could be done. The thing that I think is also most realistic and extremely symbolic, since it is being held in Belém, is that the 3 rainforests of the world is able to truly take the lead as an example of international cooperation in biodiversity protection measures. That would be certainly, to me, a very serious step where movements could be made without any pressure from the United States or China to oppose it, because they have no rainforest to protect. So why should they object to these 3 other regions trying to protect their rainforest? So that particular initiative is, I would say, very acceptable to both sides of the big power struggle. And after all, we are important allies that both sides want to have. Like, for example, Brazil is in the Americas. And the United States certainly would not like such a big, important country to do more than having Chinese EVs dominating their, their roads. So I think the American public will sooner or later wake up that it is not China that's taking the world for a ride. It is Donald Trump and his claim of climate hoax that is taking the world for a ride.
Prof. Wu, thank you so much for getting real about the US, about China, and everything and everywhere in between. I guess that's it for this episode of Wu Says. I'm Melisa Idris, and I will see you in the next episode. See you then, folks. Bye-bye.